The automatic doors of Denver General Hospital whooshed open at exactly 5:47 a.m., same as every Tuesday for the past 2 years. Maya Chen's sneakers squeaked against the polished linoleum as she made her way through the maze of corridors that had become as familiar as her childhood bedroom. The hospital at dawn had its own rhythm, quieter than the chaos of day shift, but never truly silent. Monitors beeped their steady reassurances, ventilators whispered their mechanical lullabies, and somewhere in the distance a coffee machine gurgled to life. Maya's grandmother's St. Christopher pendant caught the fluorescent light as she clipped her ID badge to her scrubs. The small silver medallion had been blessed by Father Martinez at Sacred Heart, the same church where 3 generations of Chen women had prayed for safe journeys and steady hands. Today, like every day, Maya whispered a small prayer of her own. Let me be enough. The ICU was Maya's domain, though she'd never thought of it that way when she first started. Fresh out of nursing school at 24, drowning in student loan debt, and working double shifts just to keep her head above water, she'd taken the job because it paid 50 cents more per hour than the medical surgical floor. She'd expected to hate it. The constant pressure, the families in crisis, the weight of holding lives in your hands. Instead, she'd found her calling. "Morning, mija," came a whisper from room 314. Maya smiled as she approached the bed where Mrs. Rodriguez lay recovering from her 3rd surgery in 6 months. At 89, Elena Rodriguez had survived the kind of life that would have broken most people twice over, immigrating from El Salvador with nothing but hope and determination, working 3 jobs to put her children through school, burying a husband and a son, and now fighting a body that was finally, reluctantly, admitting defeat. "How are we feeling today, Mrs. R?" Maya asked, her voice soft as she checked the monitors. She'd learned early that healing happened as much in the quiet moments as in the dramatic interventions. A gentle touch, a listening ear, the simple act of seeing someone as more than just a collection of symptoms and numbers. "Better now that you're here," Mrs. Rodriguez said, her accent thick but her English clear. "You remind me of my granddaughter. She's in medical school now, you know. Wants to be a doctor like you." Maya didn't correct her. She'd tried explaining the difference between nurses and doctors countless times, but to Mrs. Rodriguez, anyone who wore scrubs and carried hope was a doctor. "She must be very smart," Maya said instead, adjusting the pillow behind the older woman's head. "Smart like you. I see how the other nurses look at you, how the doctors listen when you speak. You have the gift." The gift. Maya had heard variations of this her whole life, usually from her own grandmother, who insisted that some people were born with healing hands. Maya had always been skeptical of such mystical thinking, preferring the concrete reality of medical science. But there were moments, like when she'd suggested checking Mr. Patterson's blood sugar 3 hours before his scheduled lab draw and caught his diabetic crisis early, or when she'd noticed the subtle change in Mrs. Kim's breathing pattern that led to the discovery of her pulmonary embolism, when she wondered if maybe, just maybe, there was something to it. "I just pay attention," Maya said, the same response she always gave. "That's the gift," Mrs. Rodriguez replied, with a knowing smile. Maya made her rounds, checking on each of her 6 patients with the methodical thoroughness that had become second nature. Room 312, Mr. Patterson, Day 3 post-cardiac surgery, vitals stable but still requiring close monitoring. Room 315, Mrs. Kim, recovering from her pulmonary embolism, finally stable enough to read the romance novel her daughter had brought. Room 318, Mr. Thompson, a construction worker whose fall from scaffolding had left him with multiple fractures and a traumatic brain injury. His wife hadn't left his bedside in 4 days. And in room 320, the one that made Maya's heart clench every time she entered, was Tommy Martinez. 16 years old, honor roll student, captain of his high school soccer team, until a drunk driver ran a red light and changed everything. The impact had left him with a severe spinal cord injury, multiple surgeries, and a future that looked nothing like the one he'd planned. "Hey, stranger," Maya said as she entered his room. Tommy was awake, staring at the ceiling with the 1,000-yard stare that came from too many hours of forced stillness. "Hey, Maya." His voice was flat, robbed of the enthusiasm that had made him one of her favorite patients during his first week. That was before the doctors had delivered the news about his legs, before the reality of his situation had settled like a weight on his chest. "Your parents coming by today?" Maya asked, though she already knew the answer. Tommy's father worked construction. His mother cleaned offices downtown. They came when they could, but bills didn't stop accumulating just because your son was in the hospital. "Dad's got a big job in Aurora. Mom's covering a double shift." He tried to sound casual, but Maya heard the loneliness underneath. She glanced at the clock, still early enough that she could sit for a few minutes before the day shift chaos began. "Want me to read some more Harry Potter? We left off right when things were getting good." For the first time that morning, Tommy's face showed a flicker of interest. "You don't have to. I know you're busy." "Never too busy for Hogwarts," Maya said, settling into the chair beside his bed and pulling out the worn paperback copy of Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban from her pocket. She'd been reading to him for weeks now, doing voices for each character. It was silly, maybe, but it made him smile. In a place where smiles were rare currency, that was worth everything. "Where were we?" she asked, flipping through the pages. "Hagrid just got arrested," Tommy said, and Maya could hear the smile in his voice now. "Ah, right, the dramatic part." She found the page and began to read, slipping into Hagrid's distinctive accent. "I'm innocent," he called, waving his massive hands at the crowd. "I'm innocent of what they've accused me of." Maya lost herself in the story, in the simple act of bringing a moment of escape to a kid who needed it desperately. She didn't notice the time passing, didn't hear her phone buzzing with yet another overdue notice from her student loan company. In this moment, there was only the story, Tommy's quiet laughter at her Professor McGonagall impression, and the steady rhythm of the machines that kept watch over healing bodies. It was only when she heard footsteps in the hallway that she realized how long she'd been reading. The day shift would begin soon, and she still had medications to distribute and charts to update. But as she looked at Tommy's face, more relaxed than she'd seen it in days, she decided the paperwork could wait a few more minutes. "One more chapter?" she asked. "Please," Tommy said, and Maya turned the page. Outside, Denver was waking up. The sun painted the eastern sky in shades of pink and gold, and the first wave of morning traffic was beginning to fill the streets. Inside Denver General, the night was giving way to day, with its own quiet rituals, shift changes, medication rounds, the eternal dance of healing that never stopped, never paused, never rested. Maya read on, her voice weaving through the familiar corridors of Hogwarts, carrying both herself and Tommy away from the sterile reality of the ICU to a place where magic was real and heroes could overcome any obstacle. She had no way of knowing that in less than 8 hours she would need to find her own kind of magic, her own definition of heroism. For now, there was only the story, the steady beeping of monitors, and the simple faith that tomorrow would be better than today. The cafeteria at Denver General served food that could generously be described as edible. Maya had learned early in her career to pack her own lunch, peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, usually with an apple if she was feeling flush. But today she'd overslept, her alarm clock victim to another power outage in her building, and she'd rushed out the door with nothing but a protein bar and determination. She stood in line behind Dr. Williams, the attending physician who always ordered the same thing, coffee, black, and whatever sandwich looked least likely to cause food poisoning. He nodded at her with the polite distance that marked the relationship between doctors and nurses, respectful but clearly delineated. Maya had learned not to take it personally. The hospital was full of invisible hierarchies, unspoken rules about who spoke to whom and when. "Long night?" Dr. Williams asked, making the small talk that filled the spaces between their professional interactions. "They're all long nights," Maya replied. which was true enough. Even when she worked days, the weight of the job followed her home. She'd lie awake sometimes, replaying decisions, wondering if she'd missed something, if there was more she could have done. Her phone buzzed against her hip. Without looking, she knew what it was, another notice from her student loan company. The amount she owed had somehow grown despite her monthly payments, some mathematical sorcery involving interest rates and administrative fees that she'd never fully understood. $847 this month, more than her rent, more than her car payment and groceries combined. She silenced the phone and grabbed a turkey sandwich that looked only moderately suspicious. Instead of eating in the crowded cafeteria, Maya made her way back to the ICU. She had her own ritual for lunch breaks, 30 minutes with Tommy, reading whatever book they were working through. It wasn't technically part of her job description, but Maya had learned that healing happened in the spaces between medical procedures, in the moments of human connection that no insurance company could quantify or bill for. Tommy was awake when she entered room 320, staring out the window at the Denver skyline. The Rocky Mountains rose in the distance, snow-capped and eternal, a reminder of the world beyond the hospital walls. "How's the view today?" Maya asked, settling into the chair that had become hers by unofficial designation. "Same as yesterday, same as tomorrow, probably." Tommy's voice carried the weight of someone who'd been forced to confront mortality before he'd even learned to drive. "Hey," Maya said gently, "remember what we talked about? One day at a time." It was advice she'd learned from her own grandmother, who'd immigrated to America with 3 children and a suitcase full of dreams. "Mija," she used to say, "you can't carry tomorrow's problems with today's strength." Maya had been too young to understand then, but now, watching Tommy struggle with a future that looked nothing like the one he'd planned, the wisdom felt profound. "Easy for you to say," Tommy replied, "but without malice. You can still walk." It was a direct hit, the kind of brutal honesty that came from someone who'd lost the luxury of politeness. Maya felt it in her chest, a tightness that had nothing to do with her own problems and everything to do with the unfairness of a world where drunk drivers walked away from accidents while honor students spent months learning to navigate wheelchairs. "You're right," she said simply. "I can't understand what you're going through, but I can sit here with you while you figure it out." Tommy turned from the window to look at her, really look at her, and Maya saw something shift in his expression. "You don't have to, you know. I know you have other patients." "I know, but Harry Potter isn't going to read himself." Despite everything, Tommy smiled. "We never did find out what happened to Buckbeak." Maya pulled out the book, finding their place with the ease of long practice. "Chapter 12, she announced, "The Patronus." She began to read, slipping into the familiar rhythm of Rowling's prose. Around them, the hospital continued its eternal hum, nurses making rounds, families keeping vigil, the steady electronic symphony of machines monitoring heartbeats and breathing, and the 1,000 small miracles that kept bodies functioning. Maya found herself thinking about Patronuses as she read, about the idea that you could conjure protection from your happiest memory. What would her Patronus be? Her graduation from nursing school, maybe, when her grandmother had cried tears of pride and her parents had finally stopped asking when she was going to find a real job. Or maybe it would be simpler. Mornings like this one, reading to a scared kid and watching some of the fear leave his eyes. "Maya?" Tommy's voice interrupted her thoughts. "Yeah? Do you think things happen for a reason?" It was the kind of question that came from hospital beds, from the strange suspended reality of being sick or injured. Maya had heard variations of it from dozens of patients over the years. Why me? Why now? What's the point of any of it? "I don't know," she said honestly. "I used to think so. My grandmother always said God had a plan for everyone, but then I see kids like you, good kids who never hurt anyone, and I wonder what kind of plan includes drunk drivers in hospital beds." "So you don't believe in God?" "I didn't say that. I just think maybe the plan is bigger than we can understand. Or maybe—" She paused, searching for words that wouldn't sound like empty comfort. Maybe the plan isn't about what happens to us. Maybe it's about what we do with what happens to us. Tommy considered this, his face serious in the way that teenagers' faces became when they were forced to think about adult problems. What are you going to do with your student loans? The question caught Maya off guard. She'd been so focused on providing comfort that she'd forgotten how perceptive Tommy was, how much he noticed about the people around him. "I don't know," she admitted. "Keep paying them, I guess. Hope they go away eventually." "How much do you owe?" Maya almost deflected. It wasn't appropriate to discuss personal finances with patients, but something about Tommy's genuine concern made her answer honestly. "More than I can afford. Way more." "That sucks." "Yeah, it does." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, two people bound by circumstance and the strange intimacy that developed between caregivers and patients. Maya realized she'd stopped thinking of Tommy as just another case, another room number on her assignment sheet. He'd become something more, a reminder of why she'd chosen nursing in the first place, back when she'd believed that helping people heal was the most important thing a person could do. "Maya," Tommy said again. "Yeah? Thanks. For reading to me, I mean, and for everything else." Maya felt something tighten in her throat. "You don't have to thank me, Tommy. It's what anyone would do." "No," he said quietly, "it's what you do. There's a difference." Before Maya could respond, her phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't the loan company. It was the hospital's internal messaging system, calling all available staff to an emergency meeting. Maya frowned, checking the time. 2:15 p.m. Staff meetings were usually scheduled for shift changes, not the middle of the afternoon. "I have to go," she said, closing the book and tucking it back into her pocket. "But I'll be back later, okay? We'll find out what happens to Buckbeak." "Okay," Tommy said. "Be careful, Maya." It was an odd thing for a patient to say to a nurse, but Maya smiled anyway. "Always am." She left room 320 and walked quickly toward the conference room, passing other staff members who looked equally puzzled by the sudden meeting. As she walked, Maya had the strangest feeling, like the air itself had changed somehow. It reminded her of the moments before severe thunderstorms when the atmosphere seemed to hold its breath. She checked her watch. 2:16 p.m. In 60 seconds, everything would change. In 60 seconds, Maya Chen would discover exactly what she was capable of when everything she'd trained for, everything she believed in, was tested in the most dramatic way possible. But for now, she was just a nurse walking down a hospital hallway, thinking about Patronuses and student loans and the way Tommy's face had lit up when she'd done her Hermione Granger voice. For now, she was still the person she'd been that morning, dedicated, caring, but fundamentally ordinary. The conference room door was just ahead. Maya reached for the handle, unaware that she was about to step into the most extraordinary day of her life. Maya never made it to the conference room. The first sound, a sharp crack that echoed through the hospital corridors, came at exactly 2:17 p.m. Maya's hand froze on the conference room door handle as her brain tried to process what she'd heard. It hadn't sounded like the usual hospital noises she'd grown accustomed to over 2 years. Not the slam of a supply closet door, not the bang of a dropped tray, not the backfire of a delivery truck in the parking lot. The second sound came 3 seconds later, another crack, clearer this time, followed immediately by screaming from the direction of the main lobby. Maya's nursing training kicked in. Assess, prioritize, act. But her brain was still catching up to what her instincts already knew. The third crack removed all doubt. Code Silver, Code Silver. All units implement lockdown procedures immediately. The voice over the intercom was calm, professional, following the script that everyone hoped they'd never have to use. But Maya could hear the slight tremor underneath the words, the recognition that this was not a drill. Code Silver. Active shooter. Maya's first thought was of her patients. 6 people in the ICU, all of them vulnerable, most of them unable to move under their own power. The lockdown protocol was clear. Barricade doors, turn off lights, hide patients if possible, and wait for law enforcement to neutralize the threat. But as Maya's eyes swept the ICU layout, she saw the problem immediately. The backup generator controls were in the hallway. If they lost power during the lockdown, the life support machines would automatically switch to battery power. But the batteries only lasted 20 minutes. The main power controls were in the basement, accessible only through the same corridors where the shooter was presumably moving. Through the reinforced glass of the ICU entrance, Maya could see chaos erupting throughout the hospital. Staff members were running, some toward the emergency exits, others toward supply closets and patient rooms. Security guards were shouting into radios, their voices sharp with urgency. "Maya!" Dr. Williams appeared at her elbow, his face pale but determined. "We need to get everyone secured now." "The generator controls," Maya said, her voice steadier than she felt. "If we lose power, the protocol is lockdown. That's it. No exceptions." Maya nodded, but her mind was racing. 6 patients. Mrs. Rodriguez in 314, still recovering from major surgery. Mr. Patterson in 312, his cardiac status still fragile. Mrs. Kim in 315, dependent on oxygen therapy. Mr. Thompson in 318, his brain injury making him completely helpless. And Tommy in 320, paralyzed from the waist down, but mentally sharp enough to understand exactly what was happening. Room 322 held Mr. Kawami, an elderly man who'd been admitted that morning with pneumonia. His family had been with him when the code silver was called. His wife, his adult daughter, his teenage grandson. Maya could see them through the window, huddled around his bed, the grandmother shielding the teenager with her body. "Start with the furthest rooms," Dr. Williams ordered. "I'll take 314 and 315. You handle 318 and 320. Maya moved quickly toward room 318, where Mr. Thompson lay unconscious, his wife holding his hand and whispering prayers in a language Maya didn't recognize. "Mrs. Thompson, I need you to help me move your husband away from the window," Maya said, her voice calm despite the adrenaline flooding her system. "What's happening?" Mrs. Thompson asked, her eyes wide with terror. "There's a security situation in the hospital. We're moving everyone to safer positions as a precaution." It was a lie by omission, but Maya had learned that sometimes the truth was a luxury that scared people couldn't afford. Together, they repositioned Mr. Thompson's bed, unplugging monitors and quickly reconnecting them. The man never stirred, lost in the medically induced coma that was helping his brain heal. Maya moved to room 320, where Tommy was sitting up in bed, his face alert and frightened. "Maya, what's going on? I heard—" "Code silver," Maya said simply. Tommy was smart enough to handle the truth. "Someone with a gun in the hospital." "Are we safe here?" Maya looked around the room, assessing sight lines and cover options. The windows faced the courtyard, away from the main hospital entrance. The door was solid, with a lock that would hold against casual intrusion. "Safer than some places," she said. But even as she spoke, Maya's eyes were drawn to the monitor displays in the room. The central power indicator was steady green, but she knew how quickly that could change. The backup generator was automatic, but only if someone was there to reset it if the main power failed. And the generator controls were— Another sound echoed through the hospital, closer this time. Not the sharp crack of gunfire, but the heavy thud of doors being forced open. Maya moved to the reinforced window that looked out into the main corridor and felt her blood freeze. A man was moving methodically down the hallway, dressed in dark tactical gear and carrying an assault rifle. He wasn't running or shouting. He was walking with the deliberate pace of someone who had a plan and the time to execute it. As Maya watched, he tried the handle of the staff break room, found it locked, and moved on to the next door. He was 3 doors away from the ICU entrance. Maya's mind raced through the possibilities. The ICU doors were reinforced and locked, but they weren't bulletproof. The man outside had the firepower to get through them if he wanted to. And when he did, he'd find 6 helpless patients and their families trapped in rooms with nowhere to run. "Maya!" Tommy's voice was quiet, but she could hear the fear underneath. "Stay down," she whispered. "Stay quiet." But Maya wasn't looking at Tommy anymore. She was looking at the power control panel in the hallway, just outside the ICU entrance. The panel that controlled not just the life support machines, but the security locks on all the patient room doors. If the power failed, those locks would default to open, leaving everyone even more vulnerable. The protocol was clear. Lock down, hide, wait for help. But the protocol hadn't been written for this situation, with critical patients who couldn't be moved and power systems that required manual intervention. The protocol assumed that hiding was the safest option, but Maya could see the flaws in that assumption. Sometimes hiding wasn't enough. Sometimes someone had to act. Maya made her decision. "Tommy, I need you to listen to me very carefully," she said, moving to his bedside. "I'm going to leave this room for a few minutes. While I'm gone, I need you to keep track of the monitors. If any of the power indicators change, if anything goes from green to yellow or red, you press the call button immediately. Can you do that?" "Maya, you can't go out there. He's got a gun." "I know, but if I don't make sure the backup systems are working, people are going to die. Not from bullets, but from machines that stop working." Tommy stared at her, and Maya saw the moment when he understood. She wasn't just talking about abstract people. She was talking about Mrs. Rodriguez down the hall, about Mr. Patterson and his damaged heart, about all the vulnerable people who depended on technology to keep them alive. "What can I do?" Tommy asked. Maya felt a surge of emotion, so strong it almost knocked her over. Here was a 16-year-old kid, paralyzed and terrified, asking how he could help save other people. "Keep watching those monitors," she said, "and if something happens to me, you tell the police that the backup generator controls are in the hallway panel, code 4729. Can you remember that?" 4729, Tommy repeated. "Maya, please don't do this." "I have to," Maya said simply. "It's what we do." She moved to the door, her hand on the lock release. Through the window, she could see the gunman was now 2 doors away from the ICU. He was taking his time, methodical in his approach. That gave her maybe 2 minutes to get to the power controls and back. Maya's grandmother's St. Christopher pendant felt warm against her chest. "St. Christopher, patron saint of travelers," she thought. "Help me make this journey safely." She unlocked the door and stepped into the hallway. The sound of her footsteps seemed impossibly loud in the sudden quiet. The hospital's normal background noise, the hum of ventilation systems, the distant chatter of staff, the electronic beeps of monitors, had been replaced by an eerie silence broken only by the occasional muffled sob from behind locked doors. Maya moved quickly but quietly toward the power control panel, her eyes fixed on the gunman's position. He was at the supply closet now, trying the handle. Finding it locked, he raised his rifle and fired twice into the lock mechanism. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space, and Maya had to fight the urge to run. Instead, she reached the power panel and quickly entered the code. The display showed all systems green, but Maya knew that could change in seconds if the main power was disrupted. She quickly switched the life support systems to backup power mode, ensuring that even if the main power failed, the critical machines would keep running. As she worked, Maya became aware of voices coming from the gunman's direction. He was talking to someone, his voice low but audible in the unnatural quiet. "Told you this would happen," she heard. "Should have listened." Maya finished with the power controls and turned to head back to Tommy's room. That's when she saw that the gunman had moved. He was no longer at the supply closet. He was standing directly in front of the ICU entrance, staring through the reinforced glass at the patient rooms beyond, at the vulnerable people inside, at Mrs. Rodriguez and Tommy and Mr. Patterson and all the others who couldn't run, couldn't hide, couldn't do anything but wait and hope that someone would protect them. The gunman raised his rifle toward the ICU doors. Maya looked at the distance between her position and the patient rooms. Too far. She'd never make it back in time to warn anyone or help them take cover. But she could see Tommy through the window of room 320, could see him watching the monitors, just like she'd asked, trusting that she would keep everyone safe. "Hey!" Maya called out, her voice echoing through the hallway. The gunman spun toward her, his rifle tracking to the new target. Up close, Maya could see his face, younger than she'd expected, maybe early 20s, with wild eyes and the kind of desperate expression that came from someone who'd lost everything and decided to take the world down with him. "You want to hurt people?" Maya heard herself say, her voice steadier than she felt. "Start with me." She stood in the middle of the hallway, her arms slightly raised, positioning herself between the gunman and the ICU entrance, between him and the patients who couldn't protect themselves. Time seemed to slow down. Maya could see the gunman's finger tighten on the trigger, could see the exact moment when he made his decision. She thought about Tommy, about Mrs. Rodriguez, about her grandmother's St. Christopher pendant and the prayers it represented. She thought about Patronuses, about the idea that you could conjure protection from your happiest memories. The first shot hit her in the left shoulder, spinning her around and sending her to her knees. The second caught her in the abdomen, doubling her over with pain so intense it whited out her vision. The third hit her thigh, and she went down completely, her body hitting the cold hospital floor with a wet sound that seemed to echo forever. But she was still between the gunman and the patients, still protecting them. Maya heard shouts coming from both ends of the hallway, the SWAT team finally arriving, voices sharp with professional urgency. She heard the gunman's footsteps, running now, and the sound of return fire. She heard Tommy screaming her name from room 320. But mostly she heard the steady electronic beeping of the life support machines, still running, still keeping people alive. As consciousness faded, Maya's last thought was of her Patronus. She'd found it, finally. It wasn't a memory of the past. It was this moment, this choice, this absolute certainty that some things were worth every sacrifice. The machines kept beeping. The patients kept breathing. And Maya Chen, 26 years old, holder of a nursing degree and $67,000 in student loan debt, slipped into darkness with the knowledge that she had done exactly what she was meant to do. Maya woke up in a hospital bed, which was ironic in a way that her pain-addled brain couldn't quite process. The ceiling above her was familiar. The same acoustic tiles she'd stared at countless times during double shifts, the same fluorescent lights that had illuminated her work for 2 years. But now she was looking at them from the wrong angle, from the perspective of the patient rather than the caregiver. The first sensation was pain, sharp and immediate, radiating from 3 distinct points on her body. Her left shoulder felt like it was on fire, her abdomen was wrapped in what felt like concrete, and her right thigh throbbed with each heartbeat. The second sensation was the strange disorientation that came with strong pain medication, the feeling that her thoughts were moving through water. "She's awake," someone said, and Maya turned her head to see a nurse she didn't recognize standing beside her bed. The woman was about her age, with kind eyes and the sort of efficient movements that spoke of experience. "Where am I?" Maya asked, though she already knew the answer. "Denver General, room 428. You've been unconscious for 3 days." 3 days. Maya tried to piece together what had happened after she'd been shot, but her memories were fragmentary. The sound of gunfire, Tommy's voice calling her name, the weight of her body hitting the floor. After that, everything was a blur of voices and emergency procedures, and the strange floating sensation of being moved from place to place. "The patients," Maya said suddenly, trying to sit up. Pain shot through her abdomen, and she gasped. "Easy," the nurse said, gently pressing her back down. "Everyone's fine. The ICU patients are all stable. You saved them." Maya closed her eyes, relief flooding through her. Mrs. Rodriguez, Tommy, Mr. Patterson, all the others, they were okay. That was what mattered. That was what made the pain bearable. The gunman? Dead. SWAT team took him down about 30 seconds after he shot you. Turns out he was a former employee, got fired 6 months ago for drug use. Came back to make people pay, I guess. Maya nodded, though the movement sent waves of nausea through her. She'd seen it before, the way some people responded to loss and humiliation by trying to inflict pain on others. It never made sense to her, but then again, she'd always been the kind of person who tried to heal rather than harm. "How bad is it?" Maya asked, gesturing weakly toward her bandaged body. The nurse, her name tag read Sarah, consulted the chart. The shoulder wound was clean through and through, missed the major arteries and nerves, so you'll have full function once it heals. The abdominal wound was more serious. They had to repair some internal damage, but nothing life-threatening. The leg wound was the messiest, but again, no permanent damage expected. "So I'll be okay?" Sarah's expression shifted slightly, becoming more guarded. "Physically, yes. You should make a full recovery. The doctors are optimistic about your prognosis." There was something in the way she said it, something in the pause before physically that made Maya's stomach clench. "What aren't you telling me?" Sarah looked uncomfortable. "I think you should talk to the administration. They've been waiting for you to wake up." "The administration? Why would—" Maya stopped, understanding flooding through her like ice water. "Oh, God, they're going to fire me, aren't they?" Sarah didn't answer, but she didn't need to. Maya could read the truth in her expression, in the way she suddenly became very interested in adjusting unnecessary things on Maya's bedside table. "I broke protocol," Maya said, more to herself than to Sarah. "I left the secure area during a lockdown." "You saved 6 people's lives," Sarah said quietly, "but I broke protocol." Maya closed her eyes and let the reality of her situation wash over her. She'd made a choice in that hallway, a choice to prioritize lives over rules, to act on her instincts rather than follow procedures. She'd do it again without hesitation, but that didn't mean there wouldn't be consequences. "Miss Chen?" A new voice made Maya open her eyes. 2 people had entered her room, a middle-aged man in an expensive suit and a woman in hospital scrubs who Maya recognized as the ICU director. "I'm Gerald Morrison, hospital administrator," the man said, his voice carrying the careful neutrality of someone delivering bad news. "This is Dr. Patricia Reeves, ICU director. We need to discuss what happened during the security incident." Maya struggled to sit up straighter, ignoring the pain that shot through her body. "I understand." "Miss Chen, we want to acknowledge your dedication to patient care during a very difficult situation," Morrison began. "However, we also need to address the fact that you violated established emergency protocols by leaving the secure area during an active shooter event." "The backup power systems were functioning normally," Dr. Reeves interrupted. "Our investigation shows that the primary power was never compromised. The actions you took were unnecessary and put additional lives at risk." Maya felt something cold and hard settling in her chest. "Additional lives?" "Yours for starters," Morrison said, "but also potentially the lives of the SWAT officers who had to neutralize the threat while you were in the line of fire. Your actions complicated their response and could have resulted in additional casualties." "But there weren't additional casualties," Maya said quietly. "Everyone lived." "Through luck, not planning," Dr. Reeves replied. "Miss Chen, we understand your intentions were good, but intention isn't enough. We have protocols for a reason. They're designed to minimize risk and maximize safety for everyone involved." Morrison opened a folder he'd been carrying. "After reviewing the incident with our security team and consulting with our legal department, we've made the decision to terminate your employment, effective immediately." The words hit Maya like a physical blow. She'd expected it, but hearing it said out loud made it real in a way that preparation couldn't soften. Effective immediately? Due to the nature of the violation, willful disregard of safety protocols during an emergency, This is considered termination for cause, Morrison continued. You'll receive payment for accrued vacation time, but no severance package. Your final paycheck will be processed within the standard 2-week period. Maya nodded numbly. Termination for cause. That would make finding another nursing job exponentially harder. Hospitals talked to each other, shared information about problematic employees. Who would hire a nurse who'd been fired for violating emergency protocols, even if she'd saved lives doing it? There's more, Dr. Reeves said, and Maya's heart sank further. The state nursing board has been notified of the incident. They'll be conducting their own investigation to determine if your nursing license should be suspended or revoked. Revoked? Maya's voice came out as a whisper. It's a formality, Morrison said, though his tone suggested otherwise. They have to investigate any incident involving protocol violations. I'm sure they'll take your heroic intentions into account. After they left, Maya lay in her hospital bed, staring at the ceiling and trying to process what had just happened. In the space of 3 days, she'd gone from being a dedicated ICU nurse to an unemployed patient facing potential loss of her professional license. The same institution she'd bled for, literally, was now casting her aside because she'd prioritized lives over procedures. Her phone, which someone had left on the bedside table, buzzed with notifications. Maya picked it up and immediately regretted it. Her student loan company had sent 3 emails, each one more urgent than the last. Payment overdue, default proceedings initiated, credit score impact imminent. Maya set the phone aside and closed her eyes. The pain medication was wearing off, leaving her fully aware not just of her physical injuries, but of the magnitude of her new reality. No job, no income, medical bills from her own treatment that would undoubtedly be enormous, student loans that wouldn't care about her circumstances. A soft knock on the door made her look up. Tommy stood in the doorway, leaning heavily on crutches, but upright and mobile. His face lit up when he saw her awake. Maya, God, I was so worried. They wouldn't tell me anything for 2 days. Tommy, Maya said, managing a smile despite everything, you're standing. Physical therapy, he said, making his way carefully to the chair beside her bed. Turns out there was more function left than they thought. I might actually walk again someday, with enough work. That's wonderful, Maya said, and meant it. Seeing Tommy upright, seeing hope in his eyes instead of despair, made everything else seem less important. Maya, I heard what happened. About your job. It's not fair. It's complicated, Tommy. No, it's not, he said firmly. You saved our lives, all of us. Mrs. Rodriguez told everyone who'd listen that you're a hero. Mr. Patterson's family wants to nominate you for some kind of award. Even Mr. Thompson's wife, and she barely speaks English, keeps asking about the angel nurse who stopped the bad man. Maya felt tears threatening. The hospital sees it differently. The hospital is wrong, Tommy said, with the absolute certainty that only teenagers could muster. What you did was brave and right and good, and anyone who says otherwise is an idiot. Despite everything, Maya laughed. Tell me how you really feel. I'm serious, Maya. You stepped in front of a gun for us, for people you barely knew. How is that not heroic? Because heroes in real life don't get happy endings, Maya said quietly. They get fired and face licensing hearings and medical bills they can't afford. Tommy was quiet for a moment, studying her face. So what are you going to do? I don't know, Maya admitted. Look for another job, I guess. Try to convince the nursing board that I'm not a dangerous rogue nurse. Figure out how to pay for all this. She gestured around the room. The media's been calling, Tommy said. Reporters, they want to interview you. Maya shook her head. I don't want to be on TV. I just want to go back to being a nurse. Maybe the media attention would help. People would know what really happened. Or it would make things worse. Make me look like someone who's seeking attention instead of just doing my job. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, two people who'd been through something extraordinary together, trying to figure out what came next. Maya watched Tommy practice his balance, marveling at his determination to rebuild his strength. If he could face the challenge of learning to walk again after a devastating injury, she could face the challenge of rebuilding her career after a devastating professional setback. "Maya," Tommy said eventually. "Yeah?" "Whatever happens next, I want you to know something. That day in the hallway, when you stood between that guy and all of us, that was the bravest thing I've ever seen anyone do. And not just because you got shot, because you made the choice to do it, even though you knew what it might cost you." Maya felt the tears come then, not from pain or self-pity, but from the simple recognition that someone understood. That someone saw her choice not as a reckless violation of protocol, but as a conscious decision to put other people's lives before her own safety and career. "Thank you, Tommy," she whispered. "Thank you, Maya, for everything." After Tommy left, Maya lay in her bed thinking about choices and consequences, about the difference between doing what was expected and doing what was right. She'd always known that nursing was more than just a job. It was a calling, a commitment to caring for others, even when it was difficult or dangerous or thankless. She'd never imagined that following that calling would cost her everything. But as she drifted off to sleep, Maya realized that despite everything, the job loss, the financial ruin, the uncertain future, she still didn't regret her choice. Given the same situation again, she'd make the same decision. Some things were worth more than job security or professional advancement. Some things were worth everything. 2 weeks after the shooting, Maya sat in the unemployment office staring at a form that might as well have been written in ancient Greek. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead with the same institutional hum she'd grown used to at the hospital. But here the similarity ended. Where the hospital had smelled of antiseptic and purpose, the unemployment office smelled of despair and bureaucracy. "Application denied," the clerk said, sliding a document across the scarred counter. She was a woman in her 50s with the tired eyes of someone who'd delivered bad news so many times it no longer registered as tragic. "Termination for cause makes you ineligible for benefits." Maya stared at the paper, the words blurring slightly. She'd known this was a possibility, but somehow she'd hoped that common sense would prevail, that someone would look at the circumstances and make an exception. Instead, she was faced with the rigid application of rules that made no allowance for heroism. "Is there an appeal process?" Maya asked. "You can request a hearing, but honestly, honey, I've seen 1,000 cases like yours. Company says you violated policy. You're out of luck. The hearing officers don't usually care about the details." Maya folded the denial letter carefully and put it in her purse next to the growing collection of bills she couldn't pay. Rent was due in 3 days. Her car payment was already late. And her student loan company had started calling at all hours, automated voices promising increasingly dire consequences for continued non-payment. The bus ride back to her apartment gave Maya time to think about how quickly everything had unraveled. In the space of 2 weeks, she'd gone from being a respected ICU nurse with a steady income to being an unemployed patient with mounting debts and an uncertain future. The physical therapy for her gunshot wounds was going well. Her shoulder had regained most of its range of motion, and the doctors were confident she'd make a full recovery. But her professional recovery was proving much more challenging. She'd applied to 12 hospitals in the Denver area. 3 had responded with form letters declining to interview her. The others hadn't bothered to respond at all. Maya suspected they'd all made calls to Denver General, and whatever they'd been told had effectively blacklisted her from the local medical community. Her apartment building was a converted warehouse in a neighborhood that was optimistically described as transitional. Maya's unit was on the 3rd floor, accessible only by a narrow staircase that made climbing with her still healing injuries an adventure. But it was what she could afford on a nurse's salary, and the rent was reasonable by Denver standards. Now, looking at the eviction notice taped to her door, even that modest rent seemed impossibly expensive. Maya unlocked her door and stepped into the studio apartment that had been home for 2 years. The space was small but carefully organized, a Murphy bed that folded into the wall, a tiny kitchen with mismatched appliances, and a desk by the single window where she'd spent countless hours studying for certification exams and reading nursing journals. The eviction notice was straightforward. Pay $1,847 in back rent within 5 days or face legal proceedings. Maya did quick math in her head. Her final paycheck from the hospital had been smaller than expected. Apparently being shot while saving patients' lives didn't qualify for hazard pay. After paying for prescriptions and physical therapy copays, she had $312 left in her checking account. She sat on her bed and opened her laptop, the same second-hand machine that had gotten her through nursing school. Her email inbox was a digital monument to financial stress, overdue notices, payment reminders, and increasingly threatening letters from her student loan servicer. The latest email from Great Lakes Higher Education Services was particularly ominous. Final notice before default proceedings. Maya clicked on it and read the details. $847 immediately due to avoid default status. Default would add thousands in collection fees and destroy what remained of her credit score. Maya closed the laptop and lay back on her bed, staring at the water stain on the ceiling that looked vaguely like a map of Texas. She'd been optimistic when she started nursing school, believing that helping people heal was not only personally fulfilling, but financially sustainable. The reality had been more complicated. Nursing paid better than many jobs, but not well enough to quickly eliminate the debt required to obtain the education in the first place. Now, without income and facing mounting medical bills from her own treatment, the financial house of cards she'd been carefully maintaining was collapsing. Her phone buzzed. Maya looked at the screen and saw Tommy's name. She'd grown to treasure his calls over the past 2 weeks. They were often the only bright spots in otherwise dark days. "Hey, Tommy, how's the physical therapy going?" "Good. I walked 50 feet today without crutches. The therapist says I might be home next week." His voice carried an excitement that was infectious, despite Maya's circumstances. "That's wonderful. Maya, you sound terrible. What's wrong?" Maya hesitated. Tommy was still a patient, technically, and she didn't want to burden him with her problems. But he'd become more than a patient over the months she'd cared for him. He'd become a friend, and friends were honest with each other. "I got denied for unemployment benefits," she said, "and I'm being evicted." "What? That's insane. You save people's lives." "Apparently that doesn't matter when you violate company policy to do it." Tommy was quiet for a moment. "Maya, my parents want to help. They've been talking about starting some kind of fundraiser, maybe a GoFundMe or something. There are a lot of people who want to support you." Maya felt a surge of emotion that was equal parts gratitude and pride. "Tommy, that's incredibly kind, but I can't accept charity." "It's not charity. It's recognition. It's people saying thank you for what you did." "I can't," Maya said firmly. "I just need to find another job. Everything else will work itself out." But even as she said it, Maya wasn't sure she believed it. The nursing job market was tighter than she'd expected, and her termination for cause was a scarlet letter that seemed to disqualify her from consideration everywhere she applied. After hanging up with Tommy, Maya spent the rest of the afternoon applying for jobs outside of nursing. Retail positions, restaurant work, anything that would provide immediate income. The applications all asked about her previous employment, and Maya struggled with how to explain the gap and the circumstances of her departure from Denver General. That evening, Maya walked to the corner grocery store to buy ramen noodles and the cheapest protein she could find. The store owner, an elderly Korean man named Mr. Park, had always been kind to her, sometimes letting her slide when she was a few dollars short at the end of the month. "You okay, Maya?" he asked as she counted out exact change for her modest purchases. "You look tired." "Just going through a tough time," Maya said. Mr. Park studied her face with the perceptive gaze of someone who'd seen plenty of struggle in his life. "You know, my nephew, he's in medical school now, wants to be a doctor like you." "I'm a nurse, Mr. Park, or was." "Same thing. You help people feel better. That's what matters. Maya managed to smile. Your nephew will make a great doctor. He better. Cost me fortune to put him through school. Mr. Park laughed, but Maya heard the underlying pride and sacrifice in his voice. Family supporting family, investing in the future even when it meant hardship in the present. Walking back to her apartment, Maya thought about support systems and the different ways people took care of each other. Tommy's family wanted to start a fundraiser. Mr. Park was proud of his nephew's education, even though it had cost him dearly. Her own grandmother had worked double shifts at a textile factory to help pay for Maya's nursing school. Maybe accepting help wasn't about charity or pity. Maybe it was about acknowledging that everyone needed support sometimes, and that refusing help was just another form of pride. But even with that philosophical insight, Maya couldn't bring herself to ask for assistance. She'd always been the helper, not the one who needed help. Learning to accept support felt like learning to speak a foreign language, theoretically possible, but practically challenging. Back in her apartment, Maya sat at her desk and opened her laptop one more time. She had 3 days to come up with nearly $2,000 or face eviction. She had 5 days to pay her student loan or face default. She had no income and no immediate prospects for employment, but she also had something that couldn't be quantified on any financial statement: the absolute knowledge that she'd made the right choice in that hospital hallway. When faced with a decision between following rules and saving lives, she'd chosen lives. Whatever the cost, whatever the consequences, that choice had been worth making. Maya opened a new browser window and started searching for nursing jobs in other cities, other states, places where her reputation might not have preceded her. It would mean starting over, leaving behind the community she'd grown to love, abandoning the patients and families she'd come to care about. But sometimes starting over was the only option left. As she searched job listings in distant cities, Maya's phone buzzed with another automated call from her student loan company. She let it go to voicemail, adding it to the growing collection of messages she couldn't bring herself to return. Tomorrow she'd start making the hard choices. Tonight she'd allow herself to grieve for the life she'd lost and the future she'd planned but would never see. Outside her window, Denver glittered in the darkness, a city full of hospitals and patients and nurses who went to work every day, knowing they might be asked to make impossible choices. Maya wondered how many of them would make the same decision she had, and how many would be wise enough to consider the consequences before acting. But as she finally closed her laptop and prepared for bed, Maya realized that wisdom and heroism weren't always compatible. Sometimes doing the right thing required abandoning wisdom in favor of instinct, calculation in favor of compassion. She'd made her choice, and she'd do it again, even if it cost her everything. The state nursing board hearing was scheduled for 9 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in a conference room that smelled of stale coffee and broken dreams. Maya arrived 30 minutes early, wearing her only professional suit, a navy blue ensemble she'd bought for job interviews fresh out of nursing school. The fabric felt different now, less hopeful, like clothes worn to a funeral. The board consisted of 5 people, 3 practicing nurses, 1 hospital administrator, and 1 public representative. They sat behind a long table with the kind of institutional authority that made Maya feel like she was back in grade school, waiting to be called to the principal's office. "Miss Chen," the board chair began, consulting her notes. "We're here to review the incident at Denver General Hospital on March 15th and determine whether your actions warrant disciplinary action against your nursing license." Maya had prepared for this moment, had practiced her explanation in the mirror of her tiny bathroom. But sitting in the sterile conference room facing 5 people who held her professional future in their hands, the words felt inadequate. "I understand, ma'am." The questioning was thorough and clinical. They walked through every moment of the incident, from the first gunshots to her decision to leave the secured area. They examined her rationale for overriding the lockdown protocol, her assessment of the power backup systems, her choice to confront the gunman directly. "Miss Chen," said Dr. Margaret Walsh, one of the practicing nurses on the board, "help us understand your thinking. You were trained in emergency protocols. You knew the established procedures for active shooter situations. What made you decide that your judgment superseded that training?" It was the question Maya had been dreading because it got to the heart of what she'd done. She'd substituted her individual assessment for institutional wisdom, her personal ethics for professional guidelines. "The protocols were written for general situations," Maya said carefully. "They didn't account for critical patients on life support who couldn't be moved or hidden. I saw a specific vulnerability that the standard response didn't address." "But the power systems were never compromised," pointed out the hospital administrator, a man named Richard Crenshaw, whom Maya recognized from various industry publications. "Our investigation showed that your concerns about the backup generator were unfounded." "At the time, I couldn't know that," Maya replied. "I saw patients whose lives depended on those machines, and I saw a potential failure point. I made the decision based on the information available to me in that moment." "And the decision to confront the gunman directly?" Dr. Walsh pressed. Maya took a breath. This was the moment of truth, the point where she had to explain the unexplainable, how in a split second of decision she'd chosen to put herself between a killer and innocent people. "He was about to shoot into the ICU," Maya said simply. "I could see patients through the windows, people who couldn't run or hide or protect themselves. Someone had to do something." "Someone did do something," Crenshaw interjected. "The SWAT team was 30 seconds behind him. Trained professionals with the proper equipment and tactics to handle the situation." 30 seconds is a long time when someone's pointing an assault rifle at helpless patients," Maya replied, her voice steady despite the emotion she felt. The questioning continued for over an hour, dissecting every aspect of her decision-making process. Maya answered as honestly as she could, but she could see the skepticism in their faces. To them, she was a nurse who'd gone rogue, who'd abandoned established protocols and endangered lives through reckless heroics. Finally, Dr. Walsh called for a recess so the board could deliberate. Maya sat alone in the hallway, watching other healthcare professionals come and go from various meetings and hearings. Some looked confident, others nervous. None looked like they were facing the potential end of their careers. 20 minutes later, Maya was called back into the conference room. The board members' faces were carefully neutral, revealing nothing about their decision. "Miss Chen," Dr. Walsh began, "this board recognizes that your intentions on March 15th were admirable. You acted out of genuine concern for patient welfare, and there's no question that your actions saved lives." Maya felt a flutter of hope. Maybe they understood. Maybe they could see past the protocol violations to the lives that had been preserved. However, Dr. Walsh continued, and Maya's heart sank. "We also have to consider the broader implications of your actions. Nursing practice is governed by established protocols and procedures for good reason. When individual nurses substitute their personal judgment for institutional guidelines, it creates a dangerous precedent." "Furthermore," Crenshaw added, "your decision to confront an armed assailant directly put additional lives at risk, including your own and potentially those of the law enforcement officers who had to respond to a more complicated tactical situation." Maya wanted to argue, wanted to point out that she'd been willing to accept those risks, that she'd made a conscious choice to prioritize certain lives over others, including her own. But she could see from their expressions that the decision had already been made. "Therefore," Dr. Walsh concluded, "this board votes to suspend your nursing license for a period of 6 months, with reinstatement contingent on completion of additional training in emergency protocols and crisis management." 6 months. Maya felt the words hit her like a physical blow. 6 months without the ability to practice nursing, 6 months without income from the only profession she'd ever wanted, 6 months of wondering if she'd ever be able to rebuild her career. "You have the right to appeal this decision," Dr. Walsh added, though her tone suggested she didn't expect Maya to exercise that right. Maya nodded numbly. "I understand." Walking out of the building into the bright afternoon sunlight, Maya felt disconnected from her own body, as if she were watching someone else's life fall apart. 6 months. It might as well have been 6 years. No hospital would hire a nurse with a suspended license, and most other healthcare positions required active nursing credentials. Her phone rang as she reached her car. Tommy's name appeared on the screen, and Maya almost didn't answer. She didn't want to burden him with more bad news, didn't want to hear the disappointment in his voice when she told him that the system had failed again. "Maya, how did it go?" 6 months, Maya said simply. 6 months what? License suspension. I can't work as a nurse for 6 months. Tommy was quiet for so long that Maya wondered if the call had dropped. Finally he spoke, his voice tight with anger. "That's bullshit, Maya. Complete and total bullshit." Despite everything, Maya almost smiled. "Language, Tommy. I'm 17 now. I can swear when the situation calls for it, and this definitely calls for it." Maya got into her car, but didn't start the engine. She just sat in the parking lot, watching other people go about their normal lives, envying their problems that probably didn't involve license suspensions and financial ruin. "What are you going to do?" Tommy asked. "I don't know," Maya admitted. "Look for other work, I guess. Wait 6 months and hope I can convince someone to give me another chance." "This isn't over, Maya. People know what you did. They know you're a hero." "Heroes don't get happy endings, Tommy. They get suspended licenses and eviction notices." Maya meant it as a joke, but she could hear the bitterness in her own voice. The optimism that had carried her through nursing school and her early career was being systematically dismantled by the reality of institutional politics and bureaucratic thinking. "Maya, listen to me," Tommy said, his voice serious. "I'm going to be discharged tomorrow. I'm walking out of that hospital on my own 2 feet because of what you did. Mrs. Rodriguez is going home next week to see her great-grandchildren because of what you did. Mr. Patterson is planning his daughter's wedding because of what you did. Don't let them make you forget that." After hanging up, Maya sat in her car for another hour, thinking about Tommy's words and about the gap between public recognition and institutional response. The media had largely portrayed her as a hero. Local news stations had run sympathetic stories about the nurse who risked her life to save patients. But public opinion didn't pay rent or restore professional licenses. Her grandmother would have said this was a test, a challenge designed to reveal character. But Maya was tired of tests, tired of having to prove herself over and over again to institutions that seemed determined to punish excellence and reward compliance. That evening, Maya sat at her kitchen table with a calculator and a stack of bills, trying to figure out how to stretch her remaining $147 until when? She'd applied for dozens of non-nursing jobs over the past week, but her background and education made her overqualified for entry-level positions and underqualified for anything that paid a living wage. The eviction notice was still taped to her door. She had 2 days left to come up with nearly $2,000 or face legal proceedings. Her student loan company had escalated to daily phone calls, each one more threatening than the last. Maya pulled out her laptop and opened a new email to Tommy's parents, whose offer of help she'd previously declined. Maybe pride was a luxury she couldn't afford anymore. Maybe accepting assistance was part of learning to navigate a world that seemed designed to punish people for doing the right thing. But as she stared at the blank email, Maya found she still couldn't bring herself to ask for help. Something deep inside her rebelled against the idea of becoming a charity case, even for people who genuinely wanted to support her. Instead, she closed the laptop and went to bed, lying awake in the darkness and listening to the sounds of the city beyond her window. Somewhere out there, nurses were working the night shift, caring for patients and making the kind of split-second decisions that could save lives or end careers. Maya wondered if any of them would make the same choice she had, and whether they'd be any better at dealing with the consequences. As she finally drifted off to sleep, Maya's last thought was of her grandmother's St. Christopher pendant, lost somewhere in the chaos of the emergency room. Like so many other things she'd treasured, it had become another casualty of doing what she believed was right. In her dreams, Maya was back in that hospital hallway, standing between the gunman and the patients. But this time, when she called out to him, he turned and walked away. The patients were safe, the crisis was over, and Maya went back to work the next day as if nothing had happened. It was a beautiful dream. Maya woke up to another overdue notice slipped under her door. Maya had been awake since 4 a.m., not by choice, but because her upstairs neighbor had decided to rearrange furniture at dawn. She lay in bed listening to the scraping sounds and trying to calculate how many more nights she'd spend in this apartment. The eviction notice gave her one more day to produce $1,847 in back rent, and her checking account balance remained stubbornly fixed at $89. She'd finally broken down the previous evening and applied for a job at a fast food restaurant near the hospital. The irony wasn't lost on her. She could see Denver General from the restaurant's parking lot, could watch her former colleagues coming and going from the place where she'd once felt purposeful and needed. The job paid $12 an hour and required her to ask people if they wanted to upgrade their fries. Maya made coffee with the last grounds in her canister and sat at her tiny kitchen table, surrounded by the detritus of a life coming apart. Bill collectors' letters, job rejection emails, legal notices, the paper trail of someone who'd made the mistake of believing that doing the right thing would somehow be rewarded rather than punished. Her laptop was open to an apartment listing in Aurora, a studio even smaller than her current place, but $200 cheaper per month. If she got the fast food job, and if they gave her full-time hours, and if she could somehow come up with first month's rent and a security deposit, she might be able to start over somewhere new. It was a lot of ifs. The doorbell rang at exactly 7 a.m., which was unusual for several reasons. First, Maya rarely had visitors. Second, most of her neighbors worked service jobs and weren't usually awake this early. Third, the building's front door had a broken buzzer system, so anyone ringing her doorbell had to have been let in by another tenant. Maya looked through the peephole and froze. A woman in a navy blue suit stood in the hallway, flanked by two men in dark suits who had the unmistakable bearing of law enforcement. Not the kind of law enforcement that came to arrest you, the kind that protected important people. The woman herself was in her 50s, with silver hair and the kind of composed confidence that came from wielding real power. Maya knew that face. Everyone in America knew that face. She opened the door slowly, wondering if she was still asleep and dreaming. "Miss Chen?" the woman asked, though she clearly already knew the answer. "I'm Rebecca Hamilton. I was wondering if we could talk." Maya stared at the First Lady of the United States, standing in her dingy apartment hallway, apparently unbothered by the peeling paint and stained carpet. One of the Secret Service agents, a woman about Maya's age, gave her a polite nod. Yes, of course," Maya stammered, stepping aside. "Please come in." The apartment had never seemed smaller than it did with the First Lady and two federal agents inside it. Maya quickly moved a stack of unpaid bills from her couch and tried to remember when she'd last vacuumed. Dr. Rebecca Hamilton, she'd been a trauma surgeon before her husband's political career, looked around the space with the kind of clinical assessment that doctors brought to everything. "Please, sit," Maya said, then immediately felt foolish for offering the First Lady a seat in her own apartment. "Thank you," Dr. Hamilton said, settling onto Maya's second-hand couch with the same grace she probably brought to state dinners. "I hope you don't mind the early hour. My schedule is complicated." "Of course not. Would you like coffee? I'm afraid I don't have much else to offer." "Coffee would be lovely." Maya busied herself in the kitchen, grateful for something to do with her hands, while her brain tried to process what was happening. The First Lady was in her apartment. Dr. Rebecca Hamilton, trauma surgeon, political spouse, and one of the most powerful women in America, was sitting on Maya's couch asking for coffee. Miss Chen, Dr. Hamilton said as Maya handed her a mug, I've been following your story. What happened at Denver General and what's happened since? Maya sat down across from her, still feeling like she might wake up at any moment. I'm not sure what you mean. I think you do, Dr. Hamilton said gently. You saved 6 lives by putting yourself between a gunman and helpless patients. And for that act of heroism, you've been fired, denied unemployment benefits, had your nursing license suspended, and are facing eviction. Maya felt heat rise in her cheeks. The shame of her current circumstances was magnified by having them enumerated by someone who lived in the White House. The hospital felt I violated protocol. The hospital was more concerned about liability than leadership, Dr. Hamilton replied. I've read the incident reports, Miss Chen. I've spoken with the patients you saved and their families. I know exactly what happened in that hallway. Maya waited, unsure what response was expected or appropriate. Do you know my background? Dr. Hamilton asked. You're a trauma surgeon. 23 years in emergency medicine before my husband's career made it necessary for me to step back. 23 years of making split-second decisions about other people's lives. 23 years of sometimes having to break rules to save patients. Maya felt something shift in her chest, a recognition that maybe, finally, someone understood. The difference, Dr. Hamilton continued, is that I never faced consequences for those decisions because I had tenure and union protection and the kind of institutional power that comes with being a department head. You had none of those things, and you made the same choice I would have made. Dr. Hamilton, I appreciate you saying that, but please, call me Rebecca and let me finish. The First Lady's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being heard. What happened to you is emblematic of a larger problem in our healthcare system. We ask nurses and doctors to be heroes, but we punish them when they act heroically. We demand that they prioritize patient care above all else, then destroy their careers when they take that directive seriously. Maya nodded, feeling for the first time in weeks that someone truly understood her situation. That's why I'm here, Rebecca continued. My husband and I have been discussing ways to address these systemic issues, to protect healthcare workers who face impossible choices, and we'd like you to help us. Help you how? Rebecca smiled, and Maya could see why she'd been such an effective political spouse. The warmth was genuine, but there was steel underneath it. We'd like to offer you a position as my personal healthcare advisor. The role would involve developing policies to protect medical professionals who demonstrate moral courage, establishing protocols for institutional support during crisis situations, and serving as a liaison between the administration and frontline healthcare workers. Maya stared at her, certain she'd misheard. You want to give me a job? I want to give you a platform, a voice, an opportunity to ensure that what happened to you doesn't happen to other healthcare workers who find themselves facing similar choices. But I'm just a nurse. I don't know anything about policy or politics or... You know everything about what it means to put patients first, even when institutions fail to support that commitment. That's exactly the expertise we need. Maya felt tears threatening. After weeks of rejection and humiliation, the idea that someone not only understood her choices but wanted to build on them was almost overwhelming. The position comes with a salary commensurate with senior advisor roles, Rebecca continued. Housing would be provided in Washington, along with full benefits and, of course, the restoration of your nursing credentials through federal intervention. Maya tried to process what she was hearing. A job in the White House, financial security. The restoration of her nursing license. It seemed too good to be true, like a fairy tale ending that belonged in movies rather than real life. Why me? Maya asked. There are thousands of healthcare workers who face difficult situations every day. Because your situation captured national attention in a way that others haven't. Because you've experienced firsthand both the moral imperative to act and the institutional punishment that can follow. And because Tommy Martinez and his family have been very vocal advocates for your case. Tommy? Rebecca smiled. That young man has been calling congressional offices, writing letters to newspapers, and generally making sure that anyone who would listen knew about the nurse who saved his life. His advocacy caught the attention of several legislators who brought your case to our attention. Maya felt a wave of emotion thinking about Tommy, still fighting for her even after his own recovery. He's an amazing kid. He's an amazing advocate, and he's right about something important. What happened to you represents a fundamental failure in how we support healthcare workers. We want to change that, starting with your case and expanding to create systemic protections for others. One of the Secret Service agents, the woman who'd nodded to Maya earlier, stepped forward slightly. "Ma'am, we should be mindful of the schedule." "Of course," Rebecca said, standing. "Miss Chen, Maya, I hope you'll consider our offer. Obviously, this is a significant life change, and you should take whatever time you need to think it through." Maya stood as well, still feeling like she was moving through a dream. "How much time?" "Take a week. But I hope you'll say yes. The healthcare workers of this country need a champion, and I believe you could be that person." After they left, Maya sat alone in her apartment, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The First Lady had offered her a job, not just any job, but a position that would allow her to continue serving healthcare workers, to maybe prevent other nurses from facing the same impossible choices she'd confronted. Her phone rang. Tommy's name appeared on the screen. "Maya, did she come? Did the First Lady really come to see you?" "Tommy, what did you do?" "What we should have done weeks ago. My family, Mrs. Rodriguez's family, Mr. Patterson's daughter, we all started calling people, senators, representatives, anyone who would listen. We told them about the nurse who saved our lives and got fired for it." Maya felt tears streaming down her face. "Tommy, I can't believe you did all that." "Are you kidding? After what you did for us? Maya, you're going to take the job, right?" "I don't know. It's all so overwhelming. A week ago I was applying to work at McDonald's, and now you have the chance to make sure other nurses don't go through what you went through. Maya, this is huge. This could change everything." Maya looked around her tiny apartment, at the eviction notice still taped to her door, at the stack of bills she couldn't pay. Then she thought about the position Rebecca Hamilton had described, about the opportunity to advocate for healthcare workers who faced impossible choices every day. "I think I'm going to say yes," Maya said quietly. "Of course you are," Tommy replied, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "You're Maya Chen. You don't back down from doing the right thing, even when it's scary." 6 months later, Maya stood behind a podium in the Rose Garden, looking out at an audience that included members of Congress, healthcare executives, and the families of the patients she'd saved. The cherry blossoms were in full bloom, creating a backdrop of pink and white that seemed almost impossibly perfect for the occasion. President Hamilton stood beside her, holding a pen that would transform her experience into federal law. The Maya Chen Healthcare Heroes Act had passed both houses of Congress with bipartisan support, a rarity in the current political climate that spoke to the universal recognition that healthcare workers deserve protection when they acted courageously. "Today," President Hamilton said, his voice carrying across the garden, "we recognize that true heroism often requires breaking rules rather than following them. We acknowledge that sometimes the greatest service to our institutions comes from those willing to challenge institutional thinking." Maya's mind wandered back to that day in the hospital hallway, to the split-second decision that had changed everything. She could see Tommy in the front row, walking without assistance now, his recovery so complete that he'd started college early and was planning to study emergency medicine. Mrs. Rodriguez sat beside him, beaming with the pride of someone who'd lived to see her great-granddaughter's first birthday. The Maya Chen Healthcare Heroes Act establishes a $50 million fund to support medical professionals who risk their careers to save lives, the president continued. It provides legal protection for healthcare workers who deviate from standard protocols in emergency situations, and it creates an ombudsman program to ensure that no one faces the kind of institutional retaliation that Miss Chen experienced. Maya thought about all the nurses and doctors who would benefit from these protections, who would be able to follow their instincts and training without fear of professional destruction. The fund would provide financial support during investigations, legal representation when needed, and career assistance for those who faced retaliation. But the most important part of the legislation, in Maya's view, was the cultural change it represented. The act formally recognized that heroism in healthcare sometimes required breaking rules, that rigid protocol adherence could be its own form of malpractice. "Miss Chen," the president said, turning to her, "would you like to say a few words before we sign this bill into law?" Maya approached the microphone, looking out at the faces of people who'd supported her journey from fired nurse to federal advisor. Her new role had been challenging, learning to navigate Washington politics, understanding the complexities of healthcare policy, working with legislators who sometimes viewed nurses as less important than doctors or administrators. But it had also been rewarding in ways she'd never expected. She'd helped develop training programs that taught healthcare workers when and how to deviate from standard protocols. She'd worked with hospitals to create protection policies for staff who reported safety concerns or acted to prevent patient harm. She'd testified before Congress about the realities of frontline medical care. 6 months ago, Maya began, I was a nurse facing eviction, career destruction, and financial ruin because I chose to prioritize patient lives over institutional protocols. Today, I stand here not as a victim of that system, but as someone working to ensure that other healthcare workers don't face the same impossible choice between doing what's right and preserving their careers. She paused, finding Tommy's face in the crowd. He gave her a thumbs up, the same gesture he'd used during their Harry Potter reading sessions. This legislation isn't just about protecting individual healthcare workers, Maya continued. It's about acknowledging that our medical institutions are only as strong as the people who work within them, and that those people deserve support when they demonstrate moral courage. Maya had been offered a salary far beyond anything she'd earned as a staff nurse. The position came with housing in Washington, full benefits, and the kind of financial security she'd never imagined possible. But she'd made a decision about that salary that had surprised even her new colleagues. I want to announce today that every dollar of my salary above what I earned as a nurse at Denver General will go toward a scholarship fund for immigrant families pursuing healthcare careers, Maya said. The Maya Chen Foundation will provide full-ride scholarships to nursing and medical school for students who demonstrate both academic excellence and commitment to serving underserved communities. The applause was immediate and sustained. Maya saw her parents in the audience, tears streaming down their faces with pride that transcended language barriers. Her grandmother had passed away 2 months after the shooting, but Maya knew she would have been proud to see her granddaughter standing in the rose garden, wearing the same St. Christopher pendant that had been returned to her by a SWAT officer who'd kept it safe. President Hamilton signed the bill with flourish, using multiple pens that would become commemorative gifts for the people who'd made the legislation possible. Maya would receive the first pen, a symbol of how far she'd traveled from that hospital hallway to this moment of federal recognition. After the ceremony, as guests mingled in the rose garden, Tommy approached Maya with his parents close behind. "So," he said, with the grin that had helped him through months of recovery, "still think heroes don't get happy endings?" Maya looked around at the scene, at the families celebrating, at the legislators discussing implementation details, at the news cameras recording a moment that would hopefully inspire other healthcare workers to act courageously. "I think maybe the definition of happy ending is more complicated than I thought," Maya replied. "This isn't an ending at all. It's a beginning." Mrs. Martinez, Tommy's mother, stepped forward and embraced Maya with the fierce gratitude of a parent whose child had been saved. "Mija," she said, using the same endearment Mrs. Rodriguez had favored, You gave us our son back. Now you're giving other families their children, their parents, their futures." "She's right," Tommy added. "This ripples out, Maya. Every nurse who doesn't get fired for doing the right thing, every doctor who speaks up about patient safety without fear, that all traces back to what you did in that hallway." Maya nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility that came with influence and platform. Her work in Washington was just beginning. There were more policies to develop, more protections to implement, more cultural changes to encourage. But for this moment, standing in the rose garden surrounded by people whose lives had been touched by her choice to act courageously, Maya allowed herself to feel something she hadn't experienced in months: hope. Not just hope for her own future, but hope for a healthcare system that would better support the people who dedicated their lives to healing others. Hope for a world where doing the right thing was rewarded rather than punished, where moral courage was celebrated rather than suppressed. As the afternoon sun slanted through the cherry blossoms, Maya thought about all the nurses working shift changes across the country, caring for patients and making countless small decisions that could mean the difference between life and death. She hoped they would see this ceremony and know that someone understood their challenges, someone valued their commitment, someone would fight to protect them when they faced impossible choices. The rose garden gradually emptied as guests departed for other obligations, but Maya lingered, reluctant to leave this moment of triumph and transformation. Tommy stayed with her, his presence a reminder of why her choice had mattered in the first place. "What's next?" he asked. Maya smiled, thinking about the stack of policy proposals on her desk, the meetings scheduled with healthcare organizations, the work that lay ahead. "Everything," she said. "Absolutely everything." 1 year after the shooting, Maya returned to Denver General Hospital. But this time, she wasn't arriving for a shift or leaving in an ambulance. She was there as the keynote speaker for the inaugural Courage in Care training program, a curriculum she'd developed to help healthcare workers navigate the space between protocol compliance and moral obligation. The auditorium was packed with nurses, doctors, and administrators from across the region. Maya recognized some faces from her time on staff, colleagues who'd watched her career implode and then rebuild itself on a national stage. Some looked proud, others curious, a few skeptical about what the woman who'd gone to Washington might have to say about bedside nursing. Maya wore her grandmother's St. Christopher pendant over a navy blue suit that had become her professional uniform. The pendant caught the auditorium lights as she approached the podium, a reminder of where she'd come from and who she was representing. 18 months ago, Maya began, I was a nurse working in this hospital's ICU. I loved my job, I was good at my job, and I thought I understood what it meant to be a healthcare professional. Then came a moment that changed everything, not just for me, but for the way our entire healthcare system thinks about moral courage and institutional support. In the front row, Maya spotted Tommy, now 18, and finishing his first semester of college with a pre-med major. He'd grown taller, filled out, lost the gaunt look that had marked his months of recovery. But his eyes held the same intelligence and determination that had made him such an inspiring patient. Beside him sat Mrs. Rodriguez, now 90, and using a walker but still radiating the fierce vitality that had helped her survive surgery after surgery. Her great-granddaughter, a toddler now, sat on her lap, occasionally babbling commentary that drew gentle laughs from the audience. The scenario was straightforward, Maya continued. Active shooter in the hospital. Clear protocols for response. Lockdown, secure patients, wait for law enforcement. Simple except for the reality that simple solutions don't always work in complex situations. Maya walked through the events of that day, but not as a victim or even as a hero. Instead, she presented her decision-making process as a case study in ethical reasoning under pressure. How do you weigh individual protocol compliance against broader patient welfare? When is it appropriate to substitute personal judgment for institutional guidelines? What are the moral obligations of healthcare workers when systems fail? I'm not here to tell you that breaking rules is always right, Maya said. I'm here to help you think through how to recognize when rules might be insufficient and how to make decisions that prioritize the fundamental mission of healthcare, preserving and protecting human life. The training program Maya had developed wasn't just about emergency situations. It addressed everyday ethical dilemmas that healthcare workers faced, advocating for patients against administrative pressure, reporting safety concerns that might threaten job security, challenging physician orders that seemed inappropriate, speaking up about systemic problems that endangered patient care. The Maya Chen Healthcare Heroes Act provides legal and financial protections for healthcare workers who demonstrate moral courage, Maya explained. But laws can only go so far. Real change requires cultural transformation. Institutions that reward rather than punish ethical behavior, colleagues who support rather than undermine those who speak up, and individual professionals who understand their obligation to patients transcends their obligation to employers. During the Kwanda session, a young nurse raised her hand. Maya recognized her, Sarah, the nurse who'd cared for her during her own hospitalization. "Miss Chen," Sarah said, "what you did was incredible, and I'm glad it worked out for you. But most of us can't afford to lose our jobs over principle. We have families to support, bills to pay. How do you balance moral courage with practical necessities?" It was the question Maya had been expecting, the one that got to the heart of why healthcare workers often felt trapped between competing obligations. "You're absolutely right," Maya replied. "It's easy for me to talk about moral courage now that I have job security and financial stability. But the reality is that most healthcare workers are vulnerable in ways that make speaking up risky." Maya paused, thinking about her own months of unemployment and financial desperation. That's why the legislation we passed isn't just about individual protections. It's about creating systemic supports that make it safer for healthcare workers to act on their professional judgment. Emergency funds for workers facing retaliation, legal representation, career transition assistance. We're trying to remove some of the practical barriers that prevent people from doing what they know is right. But Maya also talked about smaller forms of courage, the daily choices that built toward larger ethical stands. Supporting colleagues who spoke up about problems, documenting concerning incidents, even when administrators discouraged it, advocating consistently for patient needs in less dramatic but equally important ways. Heroism isn't just about dramatic moments, Maya said. It's about the accumulated weight of smaller choices to prioritize patient welfare over personal convenience, to speak truth even when it's uncomfortable, to maintain your professional integrity even under pressure. After the formal presentation, Maya spent time talking individually with healthcare workers who had questions about specific situations they'd encountered. A respiratory therapist who'd been pressured to falsify documentation, a social worker who'd been threatened with termination for reporting suspected abuse, a physician who'd been ostracized for challenging unsafe staffing decisions. Each story reminded Maya of why her work in Washington mattered, but also of how much work remained to be done. Changing laws was easier than changing culture, and transforming institutional behavior required sustained effort from people at every level of the healthcare system. Tommy approached her as the auditorium began to empty. "So," he said, "how does it feel to be back?" Maya looked around the space where she'd once felt so powerless, so isolated in her struggle against institutional indifference. Now it felt different, not because the building had changed, but because her perspective had expanded to include possibilities she'd never imagined. "Different," she said honestly. "Good different, but different." "Any regrets?" Maya considered the question seriously. The past 18 months had been transformative, but also challenging. Learning to navigate federal politics, dealing with public attention, working within systems that move slowly and often prioritized compromise over principle. "None," she said finally. "Well, maybe one. I regret that it took a crisis to create the opportunities for change that should have existed all along." Tommy grinned. Want to see something?" He led Maya through the hospital corridors toward the ICU, past the hallway where she'd made her stand. The space looked the same, but mounted on the wall was a small plaque that read, "Maya Chen Courage Corridor, in recognition of the moral courage demonstrated here on March 15, 2024. "The hospital board approved it last month," Tommy explained. "There was some debate, but the patient families were pretty vocal about wanting some kind of recognition." Maya stared at the plaque, feeling a complex mix of emotions. Part of her was touched by the gesture, grateful that her choice had been memorialized. But part of her wondered if institutional recognition after the fact was just another way of avoiding the harder work of supporting moral courage in real time. "There's something else," Tommy said, pulling out his phone. "I've been accepted to the Maya Chen Foundation Scholarship Program." Maya's eyes widened. "Tommy, that's wonderful. But you know you didn't need to apply through the foundation. I would have—" "I wanted to do it this way," Tommy interrupted. "Fair and square, just like everyone else. Besides, I want other people to know that the kid you saved is now going to medical school because of the foundation you created." Maya felt tears threatening. Tommy's journey from paralyzed teenager to pre-med student embodied everything she'd hoped her foundation could accomplish, not just providing financial support, but creating pathways for young people from underserved communities to enter healthcare. "Dr. Martinez has a nice ring to it," Maya said. "Dr. Emergency Medicine Martinez," Tommy corrected. "I want to work in trauma, help people in crisis, just like you did." As they walked back toward the hospital entrance, Maya reflected on the circular nature of her journey. She'd started as a nurse committed to patient care, lost everything for following that commitment, and now found herself in a position to protect others who faced similar challenges. But the real measure of success wouldn't be the laws passed or the foundations established. It would be the healthcare workers who spoke up about safety concerns without fear of retaliation, the nurses who advocated for patients without worrying about career consequences, the physicians who challenged inappropriate orders without risking professional ostracism. "Maya?" Tommy said as they reached the hospital entrance. "Yeah? Thank you for everything, but especially for showing me that sometimes the most important thing you can do is the thing that scares you most." Maya looked back at Denver General, at the place where her old life had ended and her new one had begun. Through the windows, she could see healthcare workers going about their daily routines, checking on patients, administering medications, making the countless small decisions that kept the machinery of healing functioning. Some of them would face ethical dilemmas in the coming weeks and months. Some would have to choose between protocol compliance and patient advocacy. Some would find themselves in situations where doing the right thing meant risking everything they'd worked to achieve. Maya hoped they would remember this training session, hoped they would know about the legal protections now available to them, hoped they would understand that moral courage was not just about dramatic gestures, but about the accumulation of principled choices over time. Most of all, she hoped they would remember that sometimes breaking the rules was the only way to keep the promises that mattered most. As Maya and Tommy walked toward the parking garage, the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the hospital campus. Somewhere in the building behind them, nurses were beginning evening shifts, checking on patients who depended on their skill and compassion and willingness to act when action was required. The work continued. The healing went on. And in corridors and patient rooms across the country, healthcare workers made choices that honored the fundamental mission of their profession: to heal, to protect, to serve those who could not serve themselves. Maya Chen had stood in a hallway with a gun pointed at her, choosing to protect strangers at the cost of her own safety and career. But the real heroism, she now understood, happened every day in quieter moments, when healthcare workers chose principle over convenience, patience over politics, courage over compliance. It was work that would never be finished, but work that was always worth doing. Maya got into her car and drove toward the airport, toward Washington, and the work that awaited her there. But part of her would always remain in that hospital corridor, standing between harm and healing, making the choice that defined not just her career, but her character. In the rearview mirror, Denver General grew smaller, but its lessons traveled with her. Some rules were meant to be broken. Some institutions needed to be challenged. Some choices were worth any consequence. And some stories, Maya reflected as the hospital disappeared from view, were worth living rather than just telling.